Welcome to Wave Wasters, I'm Matt, and today I'm going to continue on with the Otter Bite build by shaping the blank. In my last two videos, I designed this board and went over how I created the outline and rocker template, and then I hot wired out my blank and glued it up. So now before I jump into shaping, I'm going to smooth this all out, make sure it's nice and even and square, and then I'm going to cut out my template and start shaping the board. So let's jump into it. To smooth out the blank, I'm going to use my longer Surfboard and just lightly go over the bottom of the blank, using a very light pressure on the Surfboard so that it takes a very thin amount of foam off. This will also help reduce tear out on the blank. Once I have the bottom done, I'm going to repeat this on the top of the blank. Once this is done, I'll use my straight edge to make sure it's flat side to side. I'll then double check to make sure both sides of the blank are the same thickness. To draw out my outline on the bottom of the blank, I'm going to use some thumbtacks to hold the template in place and a marker to trace it out onto the foam. To cut the blank out, I'm using a handsaw, and I like to use the weight of the saw to pull the saw down into the foam. I find this helps give a nice square cut. I'm also not going to cut exactly to the line. I like to leave a little bit of space so that I can go back and square it up. To square up the outline, I like to start with the Surfboard and get it almost exactly to its final shape, but I like to leave a little bit of space, and then I like to switch over to a sanding block with 100 grit sandpaper and slowly sand it to the final squared outline. Switching to sandpaper, make sure the outline is at its final smoothness, because once you have your outline exact, you don't want to sand it anymore throughout the shaping process, or you will change the outline of your board. I also like to finalize my nose and tail outlines while cleaning up the outline. I find this helps me visualize the rest of the shape a little easier. But with the bat, tail, and nose, it does mean I need to be extra careful shaping around them so I don't break the points off. Now that I have my outline cut out and I have the nose and tail cut and everything's nice and square, I'm going to begin shaping the bottom contours. And because this board I want to be able to surf in smaller waves, and because of the size I want to shape a lot of lift into it, so I'm going to do a similar bottom to my R2 board, which is like a quad concave within a single concave, and then I'm going to put channels out the tail and out the nose. But before I do those, I'm going to shape my quad concave in this, and to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is shape a rough single concave into the board, and then I'm going to mark out my quad concave and I'll start shaping those. To shape the single concave, I like to start with getting the depth correct. So I'll shape a channel end to end at the depth I want. Because I'm going to add concaves into this, I'm only going to slope the bottom into this depth. This will make sure the points of my other concaves are at the correct depth. With this slope in, I'm going to take my sanding block and smooth out the bottom. To mark out my concaves, I'm going to use masking tape the same way you would when doing channels. So I'll place the tape on the opposite side of the area I'm going to be shaping. The tape works as a guide, and when sanding lightly up to it, it'll give you a really clean line. I'm going to also mark the center of these concaves with a marker. I'll then take my file and lightly cut a groove in the line. This will help guide the round side of the file so that I can keep the channel nice and straight. Once the channels are the depth I want, I'm going to run tape along the opposite side of the stringer I'm going to work on. I'll then slope the sides into the center. I'll then switch over to a curved sanding block to add the concave to this section. And finally, I'm going to use a soft sanding pad wrapped around a pool noodle to blend it all together. With that side done, I'll repeat this process to the other side. To check that my concaves are the same throughout the board, I'm going to check them using a contour gauge. Anywheres that I find it's not very close to the same, I'm going to go back and clean it up. With the inside concaves done, I'm going to peel the tape off and move it to the other side of the line. This will make sure that I have nice crisp edges on the high points of my concaves. For the outer concaves, I'm going to repeat the whole process. However, on the rail side of the concave, I'm going to leave it sloped and not give it a concave. With the concave shaped into the board, I'm going to add the channels to the bottom. To add channels, I'm going to use the same tape technique to keep everything nice and clean. However, I'm also going to add tape perpendicular to the channels at the end. This will ensure the channels end in the same spot across the tail. To shape the channels, I'm going to use a sanding block with 100 grit sandpaper. If I was making really deep channels, I would use the Surfboard, but these ones are not very deep, so I'll use sandpaper to reduce tear out. Channels in the tail, I'm going to repeat this whole process to the nose. Alright, now that I have the bottom contour shaped in, as well as the channels in the tail and nose, I'm going to flip this over and shape the deck. And for the deck, I'm going to put a deep single concave in the middle to give my feet a little more control over the board. And because I'm doing that, I'm going to push a lot of the foam thickness out to the rail. And I want the rails to really be able to sink into the water easy. So what I'm going to do is put a bevel on them and give them a little bit of an edge. And to do that, I'm going to measure down from the deck about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and then I'll do the same on the deck, and then I'll bevel to those two lines. And then I'll shape my deck, and then I'll go back and I will shape the rails. So let's jump into shaping this. I'm using an adjustable square to draw out where I want my bevel to be, and then I'll take my Surfboard to bevel it. Because this board has side cut, I want to bevel it more in the middle so that the rail has a more consistent thickness across it. With the bevel smoothed out, I'm going to mark out where I want the high point of my deck to be. I'm also going to mark out where I want the deepest section of the concave to be in the deck. Using the Surfboard, I'll carve out the depth I want. Once I'm happy with the depth, which on this board is quite deep, I'll slope the rest of the deck into this section and add the concave. Once I have the deck shaped, I want to take my soft sanding pad and smooth everything out. Because of the side cut, I have to shape my rails a little bit different, and I'm going to start by marking rail bands just on the ends of the board. This is so I can get them thinner so that water will flow better along the rail, where so much of it will be in contact with the water. Where I have a bevel on the rail, I'm only going to round over the top and bottom of the bevel. So I'm not going to mark out rail bands, and I'm just going to do it by eye. I'll start by roughing them out with the Surfboard, but switch to a sanding block so that I can slowly sand it down. For the bottom edge, I'm going to mark out where I want the soft edge to be and shape it with the sanding block. I'll then repeat this process to the other rail. To check that I have the rails the same on both sides, I'm going to use the contour gauge to check them. You can usually feel with your hands if there's much of a difference, but I'm trying out the contour gauge on this just to see how close I can get them. Once I'm happy with the rails, I'm going to smooth them into the deck of the board. Finally, I'm going to round over the tail of the board and then the nose. But because I want this board to surf both ways, I'm leaving the nose fairly blunt, but I'll make it slightly thinner at the end so that it slices through the water a bit better. I now have the board totally shaped and cleaned up. So the next thing I need to do to this before I glass it is install the fin boxes. And on this board, I'm actually going to put fin boxes in both the tail and the nose. I've done this before on another board and it was much smaller. And as long as you put really short fins in the front, it works okay and you don't really catch too much. But with the rocker in this board, I think it's going to work pretty good and I'll be able to put a slightly taller fin. But what I want to be able to do is pop shove it, and then the nose, because it's shaped the same as the tail, I should be able to surf off it very similar. The only big difference will be if I have different size fins in the nose than I do in the tail. It's not something you've really seen work really well, but I also want to have different fin placement that I can flip the board around and I can surf it and just try different things. So with that being said, I'm going to save adding the fins for another video, and here's how the final shape looks.